Disturbing the dead is just not prudent. One might think that would be clear, but there are times when the greatest mysteries are found not in the cosmos or in the ether or in the shadow world between life and death, but among the living. Why do people do the things that they do? What compels them to act without consideration or respect? When faced with the disturbing and uncomfortable, curiosity longs for an answer. Sometimes human nature refuses to provide one, and then sometimes it does, with a truth that is almost as unbearable as ignorance in its embrace of human frailty. Cheesman Park is an oasis amid a neighborhood of historic grand manors, tidy gardens, sweeping blocks of apartments, and towering condominiums. Within its 120 acres are a Greek pavilion, a botanical garden, and Congress Park. It is a place that embraces those from all walks of life, whether they are the wealthy elite or the struggling artist or the young professional, a far cry from the prevailing attitudes that dominated during the park's inception. Cheesman Park was once a cemetery. The story began in 1858 when General William Larimer claimed 120 acres east of the newly founded settlement of Denver. His goal was to set a cemetery in a glorious park-like setting, but a lack of water meant that his vision would not be realized. He soldiered on, though, and Mount Prospect Graveyard accepted its first two residents in March 1860. Jack O'Neill, a gambler, and John Scodel, his killer. A segregated cemetery, Mount Prospect had plots and areas set aside for the wealthy, Catholics, and minorities. Problems arose when challenges were made to Larimer's land titles. Settlers seeking land for their homesteads and Undertaker John J. Wally all laid claims. Mount Prospect Cemetery found itself mired in the dispute of late for years. The case came to the attention of the U.S. Land Office, which ended the issue when it declared the land federal property, nullifying any previous titles. 2 years later, in 1872, the land was sold to the city at $1.25 an acre under the stipulation that the land stay a burial ground. Mount Prospect was rechristened as the far more pedestrian and accessible city cemetery. Mirroring Denver's intentions for its new acquisition, it would no longer be the domain of the respectable members of society, but of the downtrodden and the prosecuted, transients, epidemic victims, and criminals. The grounds were allowed to fall into a less than pristine state. With Denver's rapid expansion, demand for land grew, and nowhere was it stronger than the area of City Cemetery. Rail and mining barons wanted this land for themselves so they could construct their grand mansions in the shadows of the Rocky Mountains. The city was more than willing to oblige. A new cemetery had been built off the banks of the Platte River, and friends and families of the deceased were moving many of the bodies from City Cemetery to plots in the new cemetery. In 1893, Denver lobbied Congress to designate City Cemetery as a parkland. The request was approved, and a section of the land was named Congress Park to honor the decision. But Denver now faced a problem. Many of those buried in City Cemetery had no relations or friends to look after the transport of the remains to new plots elsewhere. The city hired an undertaker, Edward McGovern, to move the estimated 5,000 bodies. McGovern was far from scrupulous. He respected neither the dead nor their rights to rest in peace. Graves were looted. Determined to cut costs, McGovern and his workers would pack 2 to 3 bodies into a single pine coffin. If there wasn't room, corpses were broken up, limbs and appendages lopped off freely so they could fit in the coffins. When McGovern and his men tired of digging up bodies, they filled the coffins with rocks instead of bodies. Since few had mourning their passing, McGovern reasoned who would stand for the dead now. But McGovern had not counted on the court of public opinion. Local newspapers discovered quite easily what he had been doing. McGovern made little effort to disguise his works, and when reporters visited the site, they found it strewn with body parts. The public was outraged and shocked. The city of Denver fired McGovern in order that any body still in the site after 90 days remained there. After 90 days, between 2 and 3,000 bodies had been unclaimed. The city covered the ground with grass and trees, eager to forget the scandal. Landscape architect Richard Scheutz was hired to design the park in 1898, and he began drawing up plans for a Greek pavilion and winding paths. Unfortunately, the city couldn't afford the pavilion, at least not until unpopular local millionaire Walter Cheesman died in 1907. His wife donated the $100,000 necessary to fund the pavilion's construction. In exchange, she asked that the city name the park after her husband. It wasn't long before Cheesman Park became the centerpiece of suburban neighborhood of grand manners for the wealthy children of Denver's Capitol Hill elite. But life in Cheesman Park wasn't nearly as comfortable as these scions might have hoped. Area residents began reporting that ghosts were haunting their homes, appearing out of thin air, looking quite confused and lost. People looking in mirrors have seen, along with their own reflection, that of an individual they've never seen before. Whirling around to look behind them, they find they are alone, and the figure in the mirror is gone. If the spirits aren't haunting these homes, then they haunt the park. A number of people have gone to Cheesman Park for a picnic and enjoyed themselves under the sun, only to find that they are unable to leave. Many have reported that an unseen force pushed down on them, preventing them from standing up. A man once fled the park claiming a ghost had jumped on his back. When the moon is full, the park is transformed. The ground reflected in the moonlight illuminates the outlines of the original cemetery graves. Today, the spirits are still restless, a constant reminder of one man's disregard for the dead. Psychic sensitives walking through Cheesman Park feel saturated with confusion and sadness, while those who pass through late at night can hear a low moan come from underneath. It seems McGovern and his disrespect for the bodies had awakened the dead. His efforts to save money and move quickly, hacking off limbs and denying the dead a proper burial, roused the spirits from what should have been an eternal slumber. They now roam the area, wondering why.